Self-Love is the New Sexy, the podcast devoted to helping you overcome life's most painful and stubborn challenges so you can feel great, have more energy, and live stress-free every day. To reach your full potential, simply work with the powerful spiritual principles that are readily accessible to everyone. It's easier than you think, and on today's show, W. Mark Watts is going to show you how starting with self-love is the key to joyously and harmoniously making that happen.
Hey everybody, this is W. Mark Watts. Welcome and thank you for hanging out with me for another episode of Self-Love is the New Sexy. And in today's episode, it's going to be a continuation. At the time that I'm recording this, I think this is going to be a 3-part series. So the first part I did was called The Fastest Way to Self-Love. So this is going to be part 2. And in part 2, I want to show you a real life, heartfelt example in my life that exemplifies what self-love doesn't look like and what it gives an example out, and I'll explain to you as well what it should look like. So again, the goal is to get to self-love to the point where you're loving yourself, where I'm loving myself, where we all are loving ourselves completely so that we live a life full of peace, joy, happiness, and we're accomplishing our goals and we're getting along and we're raising the vibration of humanity and the planet as a whole. That's the goal, right? But we're not there yet. None of us are there yet. So it's a work in progress. So let me give you this example, and then I'll explain to you what it could look like, what it should look like versus what it actually did look like. So let me get into it. Okay, so my real life, if you may have heard this in a previous episode, I think I discussed it at least once on the podcast in the past. But if you haven't, and for those of you who have, it's still a great example of the point I'm trying to drive home in this series. It is a 3-part series. And it's simply this. So I was in a relationship, a great relationship, for 12 years with a wonderful lady. I relocated from Atlanta, Georgia, up to Detroit, Michigan. We were at the point where had actually, the month before we broke up, we started talking about getting married. So say April, we started talking about getting married. And then the very next month, almost a month, 4 or 5 weeks later, after we had kind of set in some loose plans, she basically decided she wanted to go in a totally different direction, which meant we were breaking up at that point. Now, there was no discussions. It was just basically, now I'm not going to lie and say I did see a couple of signs that something might be going wrong, but I never thought that would be the outcome. However, that was the outcome. She was 100% sure. She wanted to end the relationship, and that was it. And very little conversation as well. So now here's what could happen, what should happen if I understood at the time, or if I had been loving myself the way that I should be loving myself. It should have gone like this. She told me she wanted to break up. I should have asked her if she was sure. She said yes. I would have said okay. We would have parted ways. There needed to be no more communication. There needed to be nothing else at that. No questions needed to be answered or anything. We just would have gone our separate ways, moved on with our lives, and everything would have been beautiful, right? That's the perfect world. That is the world of a fully self-loved person. If we both had been able to do that, we both would have been completely loving ourselves 100%. Now, the real weird part about this is we had actually taken a course or like a one-day little seminar at the church that we were attending at the time. And the pastor there, his main message, or one of his main messages during the seminar, was he and his wife basically had an agreement. And the agreement is simply this, that if one or both of them decided that they no longer wanted to be married to each other, then they always had the right to do that and the blessing of the other person, right? And in fact, they had a saying that each day they would say, I love you today, which meant that today, at this moment, I love you and I want to be with you. However, if the opposite becomes true, and in fact, they do not love each other anymore, they want to part ways, they would do it immediately, amicably, and everything would be good between the two of them. Now, here's what happened in reality when my girlfriend at the time broke up with me. Now, I attempted with everything that I had to be loving, because we did agree that I did not put up a fight at that time and didn't say much. We parted ways. She was at my place at the time. She left, and then we were moving forward from there. So at that time, I did not let too much of my emotion show. We both let a little bit of an emotion show, but not very much. And so I had hoped, it was my plan, that I was going to be able to remain emotionless about this major upset in my life, right? Wrong, not going to happen. I was not prepared for that. I was not in a strong relationship with God, source, universe, which meant I had a lot more self-love to do on myself, because not only did I feel horrible, I cried, I was, I won't say I was depressed, but I was very sad, upset, wanted answers, all the whole 9 yards. And, it made it even worse that she didn't want to talk, or she was not talking, which meant that I was not going to get any answers. So now that was and is the fastest way to self-love. Why? Because that event, when it happened in my life, that hurt so much. I felt so bad. I felt so down and upset because I was not in complete alignment with God. Because if I were, I would have been able to do what the preacher had insinuated or talked about in the seminar, is if my partner wants to move on and does not want to be in a relationship with me anymore, I would be totally fine with that. Now, that's not to say that, of course, we're all human, right? You're going to have some feelings. So I'm not saying don't have any feelings or you shouldn't have any feelings. What I'm saying is it should not linger on. There should not need to be a huge debate. There actually doesn't need to be any additional conversations about it at all. You should be able to release that person. They should be able to release you. You should be able to go your separate ways and live your life peacefully, because everything in your life is already in a good place. If everything in your life is already solid, your foundation is solid, your relationships are great, you know that you're okay, then you're going to be okay with whatever happens in your life. But events highlight the places where you need to love yourself more. And relationships, especially where it's relating to issues of abandonment, codependency, and things like that, self-esteem, self-worth, those things become highlighted when major events in your life occur. So why is that one of the fastest ways to self-love? Is because it rings a red alarm, loud alarm, red bells go off. They go off because the way you can tell is how much pain you're in and how out of balance you get when something happens in your life. So that in and of itself tells me, whoo, man, I got a lot of work to do. Now, I didn't know it right at that time, but a little bit after that, as I continued to get coaching and get better understanding and become more self-aware, I realized exactly what it was. What happened, that event told me that my relationship was not in concert. I was not aligned with God's source universe. Therefore, I felt so many different ways about something that had happened, when in actuality, it didn't affect how my life was going to proceed at all. My life was actually fine and is fine, right? But I wasn't able to see it at that moment. And for some time thereafter, I was not able to see that. I was just mired in, questions and hurt, pain, anger, just not understanding how that could happen. You name it. the normal types of things that we think or ways we think relationships should end. That's where I was. Now, I'm no longer there in that space anymore because, again, my relationship has become more aligned with God, so that now I understand that everything's okay. When it's time for me to meet that special someone, she will appear, we will recognize each other, and things will go on as planned. Everything else in my life is fine, right? But we think it's not, and we make a big deal out of it as if it's not. So we have to understand that when something traumatic, something huge happens in our lives, the reason why we feel so bad, the reason why it takes us out of who we are, the reason why it seems so difficult for us to get over is because we're out of alignment with God, Source, Universe, the Divine. When we are in alignment, those things don't bother us. We'll be able to make a clean break. We'll be able to go in the direction we're supposed to go in. Everything will be fine. No explanations needed. And we'll just, life goes on. That's the perfect scenario. That's where we have to get to. Now that I've been through that situation before, I can tell you I'm much stronger now. I'm much more in alignment. I have a much better understanding of what self-love means, what traumatic events mean when they occur in your life. And therefore now I have a plan. I know how to approach those things when they happen in my life. So I just wanted to give you an example of, a real event, dramatic event that happened in my life and how I handled it and felt about it versus what it actually could be and should be in a perfect world. Now, we're never going to be perfect. That's not the goal. The goal is to get to a point where we're so aligned with God, where we already know we're whole, so that when something happens, we can take it, we can roll with it, and we can keep on moving on our great path, on this great journey called life that we have set before us. Now, I'm going to end here on this part 2 of this series, because in part 3, I'm going to talk about maybe a couple different practices that you can put in your tool belt that are gold, that in order, because I keep talking about being in alignment with God's Source, Universe, the Divine, right? But I haven't told you some easy ways to do that, because, many people tell you what to do, but they don't also show you and give you the tools. Well, I'm not that person. So I want to round out part 3 with giving you some tools that are easy to use, that you can use at any given point in your life, and that you should use, because the more that you use them, the more in alignment you come, and the more in alignment you will stay, so that when life comes your way, you're able to deal with it, manage it easily, and move forward in power as we were all designed to do. All right, great folks. Always a pleasure to be here with you. Look forward to speaking with you all again really soon. Bye now.
You've been listening to Self-Love is the New Sexy with W. Mark Watts. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to tell a friend. Also, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to our show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, or wherever you listen to podcasts.